Hello and welcome back to Widowed AF. I am joined today all the way from Canada by Laurie Meeboer. I'll just ask you how to pronounce that, Laurie. I do apologize. I've even written it phonetically. Right, Laurie Meeboer. Meeboer? Is that close enough?
Correct. That's
Sorry.
correct.
Sorry, Laurie. Right, welcome to the podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to be talking to you today. And I did disclose to you that I've been quite apprehensive about doing this interview. And so just to kind of bring the listeners up to speed, Laurie's husband drowned, as did my husband. And I've got goosebumps even saying that. This is going to be ridiculous. And we spoke previously, and we've both been members of this Hot Young Widows Club, or the group formerly known as the Hot Young Widows Club, or whatever we go by now. And we've known each other for kind of the entirety of our journey, from a distance. But you just said to me, we've never spoken. And I thought, we haven't. And I don't think that's a face value thing. I think perhaps being the only two, we think, members of the group that we're in, who lost our partners to a drowning. And I think perhaps we were maybe a bit scared, and I'm quite nervous today. So yeah, this could be quite challenging, but I think it's really important that we have this conversation.
It's funny that we haven't spoken until today because I
Mm.
know we have followed each other's journeys. We've commented in our group on each other's
Mhm.
posts, and I remember when Jonathan was sick, and my family was so in tune with what was happening across the pond. And it's really uniquely interesting that I believe we're the only two members in our group
Mm.
who experienced a water tragedy, and yet we've never had a conversation about it. So
Yeah.
I guess we're doing that today.
We're going to do it. We're going to do it in front of 50,000 listeners. So what could possibly go wrong? It's fine. It's not live. So, Laurie, I've just sort of given away a little bit of your story there, just to kind of give some context. And Rich was your first husband, wasn't he? Yeah,
Yes.
and he drowned while you were on a camping trip. So with your children, and I noticed in your application, and it's something I didn't know, that there was a month-long search for him. And for
Correct.
some reason, that really, I don't like this word, but it triggered me because there wasn't a month search for Ben. There was a few days, and I initially thought, oh, I should have searched longer. And there's so many additional guilts and shoulda, woulda, coulda when it comes to grief. Because what was I going to do? Go out on a boat and search the channel? It wasn't an option, but you immediately get that, oh, I didn't search for a month, and I don't know. We're complex beasts. But yeah, actually, without further ado, I think I'm going to get you to tell your story, Laurie, because
Sure.
I'm really interested to hear it.
And I will say, Rosie, that I have the advantage of having listened to your podcast of you telling the whole story. And I actually will admit that I listened to it a couple of times to kind of
Oh,
de-trigger myself, because there is that search component, and I know your story as well. So um, my late husband Rich, and I had actually, and I don't know how much of my story you know, so I'll tell the whole thing.
you tell the whole
um,
thing. Mm.
so I Rich and I had both been married before, and we knew each other on a professional level. So I knew him through business. I've known him since 1995. Um,
Wow. When
and
you were just
s
a baby, right?
I was just a baby in
Yeah.
infancy. So we knew each other professionally, and we knew each other for a very long time, and we became professional friends. And he went through a divorce, and then at some point I went through a divorce, and he had 3 children, I had 2 children, and he became a really strong support for me after my divorce, and eventually that led to spending time together with our kids. We lived 3 hours apart. It led to spending time together with our children and making a very serious, conscious decision that we were going to attempt to blend our lives together. And when you begin dating someone and you have children in the picture, as you know, Rosie, and you have
Mhm.
children in the picture, it is a very serious and conscious decision that you make. And our kids loved each other and got along with each other very, very well. And so we decided to blend our lives. And over the course of the next few years, I guess, beginning 2009, 2010, over the course of the next couple of years, we slowly blended our lives, which resulted in us combining households and two of Rich's children living with us and raising our kids together, along with a host of international students. We had international students over the years, two of whom have become our Canadian daughters and have continued their adult lives in Canada. Um, we were married in
You like a busy house, I'm hearing here. You
a
like a
busy
little
house.
yeah,
So
me too.
at any point in time, there were up to 6 kids in the house, and we weren't a house of steps. There were no stepchildren and step-parents.
Same.
We were just a family. And it's a lot of work to blend a house, and it's a lot of mixing of personalities, and we did it, I think, really well, but we put in a lot of hard work
Yeah.
to do that. And in 2015, we were married, mostly due to the urging of the kids. "Come on, when are
Oh.
you getting married? When are you getting married?" So in 2015, we were married, and I remember that day as being just genuine, pure joy. It was just joy. I was so happy. And our families, our kids and our parents and siblings, our families just became one. It really was a beautiful time in our lives. And it was lovely to have. And then in 2017, we had a few speed bumps with kids and life, as that goes. Life is never perfect and it's not easy. And May of 2017, in February of 2017, we lost my grandmother. In May of 2017, we lost my uncle, who I was very close to. And we decided to take a trip with our kids, and we took our kids to Mexico. And it was the single best decision I've ever made. For anyone who's listening, take the trip, spend the time, just do it. Don't second guess it.
Mm,
Um, and 4 weeks later, he was gone, and
mm,
we'd only been married a year and a half. We took an annual camping trip to a lake about an hour and a half north of where I live in the Canadian Shield. And if anyone knows the Canadian Shield, it's just the most beautiful, rugged, wonderful land. And the lake that we went to is called Mazenod. It's a beautiful lake with a rich history, and there's a provincial park there called Bon Echo, means good echo in French. And I grew up with that lake. I grew up cottaging and camping on the lake next to it, but my father grew up on that lake. My family, there's roads up near that lake that have family names that go back in my family history. I have ancestors buried near that lake. My grandparents lived on that lake. My dad learned to swim on that lake. My whole family, I raised my kids going to that lake. That lake was my single happy place in the world. And so we would take an annual camping trip as the kids finished school, finished exams. They were in high school. And this particular time, I was painting to prepare to be in a show. So I'm a professional artist. I have a career
didn't
in
know that either, Laurie. That's
you do it.
really
I am.
cool.
I am. So I'm a professional artist on top of I have a career in HR, but I'm also a professional artist. In 2016, Rich built a studio in our home for me so that I would have my own space. And which was wonderful, sacrificing some space for the kids and for him, but he built me my studio. And so I was preparing for a show, and I said to him, "I really need this time to paint. Can you go without me?" Which I have tremendous guilt about.
Oh,
Uh,
darling.
Um, and we were sitting on Friday night. So he was taking our 2 youngest daughters and 2 of our international students, to go. Our other kids were off living life. Everyone was in college and university. They were off and living life and doing their thing. And it was raining that Friday night before. And so he didn't go on the Friday night. He postponed to Saturday. And we sat in our living room on Friday night. And he said to me, "Maybe I just won't go." And I said, "No, go. The kids really wanna go." And he said, "Well, we could just do something around here, go to the beach here." And, I said, "No, they really wanna go to Bon Echo. You should go to Bon Echo." And then he said, Um, well, maybe I won't take the boat. I said, you should take the boat. So, as you know, I live with a lot of guilt around those 3 or 4 sentences
Mhm.
where I kind of encouraged him to please
Yeah.
go take the trip. So Saturday morning, he didn't wake me. Um, Knowing him, he probably kissed me on the forehead, but he didn't wake me. So when I woke up, they were gone already. I don't know what our last words were, except that lying in bed, I remember saying to him, "Don't be grumpy tomorrow. Be fun, Dad. Don't be stern. Be fun, Dad." And he said, "I will." And I said, "Okay, just really enjoy the weekend and have fun with them." And he was a really great girl dad. And he would always push his girls to be more adventurous and brave and strong. And so I thought it was kind of fun that he would have this trip with the girls, with our 2
Yeah.
international students and 2 of our daughters. And so I don't know the last kiss and I don't know the last words. And that's something that I will probably forever mill around in my head. And that morning, that lake has very poor cell reception.
Mhm.
So, and I always say to the kids, reach out when you can. And so he would reach out at some point when he could. And there's a very large cliff at the lake, and if you hike to the top of the cliff, sometimes you get cell reception. So I was painting, and a friend was here who's also an artist painting with me, and um, I s- I got a text from him, and the text said, "We're going on a hike. Everything's great. The sun is shining off of the water. I wish you were here. I love you." And the sun is shining off of the water was very interesting because my dad passed in 2015. And I remember sitting with him and he wasn't responsive. And the nurses telling us he can probably still hear you. So would say to him, "Dad, just think about being back at the lake and the way the sun," my dad was also an artist, and the way the sun would shine off the water. And I remember painting that imagery for my dad in his head. And the fact that Rich used those identical words, I feel like now should have made me catch in my chest. Like there's almost this feeling, and you know this, we look back on our stories, especially those of us for whom it was an accident, and we think, were there signs? Was there something?
Yeah.
Should I have known? Should I have seen, heard, understood? And I don't know. But he said those words, and I think back and I think I should have caught it. So he told me everything was good and things were fine. And then I got another text about, I think it was about 1 p.m., saying, "Just going to launch the boat, taking the kids tubing." And do you know what tubing is in the UK?
Is
It's
that
the
where you
this
sit
thing
in a
where
big tyre and get pulled behind a boat? Oh, yeah, I
that's
thought it was
right.
that, but I'm glad that you said that so I didn't have to look stupid.
Yes, yes, yes. So
Thank you.
so he said, "Just putting the boat in the water, I'm taking the kids tubing." And at 2:06 p.m., my mom, who lives in, to use UK terminology, a flat attached to the side of my house. She has her own home kind of apartment on the side of my house. My mom came running in and she had this frantic tone in her voice. And she said, "Maya's on the phone." Maya's my youngest child. She said, "Maya's on the phone. Something's wrong." And I hadn't been looking at my cell phone. So, and I guess my ringer was off. And she had tried to call me. And so she called my mom's landline. And my mom came running over. I grabbed the phone. I said, "What's wrong?" And my child was screaming a scream that I never, ever want to hear again. And she said, "Mom, we can't find Rich." And I said, "What? What do you mean you can't find Rich?" And I honestly thought she'd gotten lost in the campground. It's a very large campground. And so my brain kind of went there. "What do you mean?" And she said, "We're in the boat and he," the little detail I had was that he had jumped in to aid one of my other children and I. I don't speak the name of which child it was to protect her privacy, but,
I
um,
understand that.
he had gotten into the water. So, my husband was like a Navy SEAL, and I'm sure you've seen pictures of him, Rosie. He was athletic, he was built, he was this didn't make sense to me in processing what she was saying, much like your husband. He was a water baby. Water was home to him, right? And so I just yelled at her, "Call 911." And she said, "We have already." And when she said, "We have already," I think my brain broke.
Yeah.
And all I could think was, I need to get to her. I said, "Are you okay? Are your sisters okay? Are you safe?" She said, "I'm okay. I'm okay. There's people here." And I said, I'm coming. I'm on my way." And I hung the phone up. And my mom, bless her heart, is in her 70s, and she is this she's not even 5 feet tall, but she is a force of nature. And my mom said, "Let's go." And we got in the car, and something happens, and you know this. Something happens to you in that moment when you first realize life is just about going sideways, and this calm comes over you, and you become very matter of fact. And I I went into mom mode, and I said, "Okay, what do I need to we need to search. I need to find people who can search. We need to I need to make sure my children are okay because they're at a lake. They're an hour and a half from where I am."
I was just going to say to you, how far were you from them? Because any distance is going to feel, the magnitude is going to feel enormous at this
Right.
time.
Anything that you can't run to in 30 seconds feels
Yes.
like
Too
forever.
far. Yeah.
And so, I mean, I s I methodically thought, who lives close to us and has a boat? Who could be up at the lake and could get to the lake? So, the first call was to my ex-husband,
Oh,
and I
wow.
said,
Okay.
"I need you to get in the car." This much I knew in my shock. I said, "I need you to get in the car, and I need you to drive. This is what is happening. I can only tell you that our girls are okay. As far as I know, the kids are safe, but I need you to get in the car because I need you to be a parent, because right now I need to be a wife." And I just knew I needed his support, and he was incredibly supportive. And so he said, "I'm in the car." His brother lived close to the lake, so he was trying to contact his brother. It's quite a remote area. And then I called our neighbors, of which he is a police officer, and I said, "I need you to go in backdoor channels, see if you can get any information for me. What's happening? The Ontario Provincial Police, I need a contact. I need to know what's going on." Um, Give them my cell number to call, and because I knew at the park there would be a landline the police could get to me through, because I was trying to call my daughter. She called me from Rich's phone, and I couldn't get through. Like, we'd lost the signal again. So I was battling a signal that we couldn't it was on and off. And then I called a couple of friends who I knew had boats, who might be in the area or close to the area. And then I made a couple of other phone calls, just trying, scrambling to get information. And then I called my sister, who lives 5 hours away, and I'm certain that the phone call was just nonsense, because I didn't know what was happening. And I remember her yelling to me through the phone, like, "What do you mean? What are you saying to me? What do you mean?" And I said, "I don't even know what I mean."
It's when
And
you say, sorry, I've just talked into you, but I remember doing this to my dad because my parents were in Cuba
Mhm,
on holiday, as you do, and I couldn't get hold of them because they weren't in a resort. Of course, they were in some off the beaten track
of course.
bit of Cuba, of course. And when I finally got through to them, um, I sort of said, "It's Ben. He's gone." And my dad went, What do you mean he's gone?" And he was almost quite. I think he what he thought had happened, but it was like his brain couldn't compute what had happened, and because it doesn't make any sense, does it? And actually, at the time, you're not going to ring them and say they're dead because you're clinging on to the hope that they aren't.
It's a very it's a very bizarre thing. And what happens to your brain I can only describe as shock, but something happens that insulates your brain,
Yeah.
and I know it's a protection mechanism. It's to keep you alive. It's to keep you thinking clearly enough because your body goes into full fight or flight response mode. And so this hour and a half drive, I'm making phone calls. I get a phone call back from the police officer friend. He said, I don't have more details, which I now know he was just protecting me till I could get there.
Okay.
And and then the OPP called me and told me exactly where to go when we got to the park. And so that hour and 20 minutes, I don't know, was just a blur getting there. And thankfully, my mom and I know those roads the way we know the back of our hand. It's autopilot. We could get there because it
Did
probably
she
wasn't
drive
safe.
you? Did
She
she
drove.
drive? I was going to say, I
Sh
can't imagine you being in a we talk about the mental clarity, who knows? But I don't know as I could have got behind a wheel.
No, and
No.
probably she shouldn't have been either, but it's what happens.
Lesser of the evils, really, isn't it? Yeah.
And we got to the park, and as we pulled in, I saw an ambulance pulling out, and it wasn't lights and sirens. And I jumped out of a moving car, my mom's moving car, and I ran to the ambulance. I literally ran into the path of the ambulance, just screaming at them as my husband in the ambulance. And the paramedic got out of the ambulance and she said, "No, you need to go to the park staff." And I'm thinking, why in the hell is the ambulance leaving if they
Yeah.
if he needs them? Why are they leaving? Of course, in the back of my head, I knew why they were leaving. And so we got to the park staff who then got into the car with us. And as they got into the car with us, a dragonfly that was the biggest dragonfly I've ever seen landed on my passenger side window, and it was bright orange. And never in my life had I seen an orange dragonfly. And orange was his favorite color, being Dutch. He loved Dutch
He
orange
was Dutch. I
and
didn't know
he
that.
was Dutch. And it landed on the window, and I said, "Oh." And I turned to my mom and I said, "He's gone. I I just know it. I know he's gone." And she said, "Stop, stop, stop." And so we drove to the park has like a main office for their staff, and it's there's a like a museum and an office. And we got there and we walked inside, and the park staff directed me up the stairs, and standing there was a police officer who looked shockingly like my husband.
Oh my goodness.
And I looked at him and I said, "You're Dutch, aren't you?" And he said, "I am." And I said, "You look like my husband." And he just looked at me and he said, "Is that a problem?" And I said, "No, it's strangely comforting because you look like family." And I could hear my kids in another room crying. And he said, "I need to talk to you before I take you to your kids. There are people with your children." And then he directed my mom to go to my kids. And he sat me down. I'll never forget this, face to face in chairs. Our knees were almost touching. And he looked at me and he said, "I need you to understand 2 hours have gone by um, since the 911 call. And we have boats on the lake. We have OPP boats on the lake. They had paddle boarders, they had canoers, they had kayakers, they had fishing boats. They had everyone who was on the lake that day. It was a very busy day on the lake. Everyone who was on the lake that day had kind of congregated and were
Mm.
searching. And so to help you to understand, um, it's a quite a large lake and it's a very deep lake, and they were in the middle of the lake. So there wasn't the possibility that he had just gone to shore.
Yeah.
That wasn't a possibility. And he said to me, "I need you to understand what I'm saying to you." And I said, "I know what you're saying. I know this lake. I grew up on this lake. I know what you're saying." And he said, "This is no longer a rescue, it's a recovery."
Fuck.
And
Sorry.
I'm going to tell you something that's funny now that you will understand because I looked at him and I said, "I'm not crying. Why am I not crying?" Because my brain broke in half, right?
Mhm.
And I said, "I'm not crying. Why am I not crying?" And he said, "You're in shock." And Rosie, I don't know what happened, whether the watching too many true crime things had infiltrated my brain in that moment. And I said, I'm not reacting normally. Do you think I had something to do with this?
Oh, Laurie. Oh, God. But do you know what, right? And I'm just going to tell you something, because when the police came to my house, they were sort of searching for, I mean, it was a very low level search, but in order to fulfill the criteria that they had looked, they had to just have a little look round. Now, I had this, this is so stupid. I used to use this kind of microdermabrasion stuff. And it came in like a white bag of white powder. And I just went, there's a bag of white powder on my dressing table, but I promise it's for exfoliating my face. And they just looked at me and was like, it's fine. I just thought, but like you think, and I was thinking, do they think I've done something? Do they think that we've conspired to claim life insurance? Or, but yes, like you, I thought, am I doing this properly? Is this how we were meant to do
Yes,
it? Yeah.
it's so bizarre. And I look back now and I think, What in the world was I thinking?" And somehow I didn't shock him by saying it, so, they must be used to it. And so he kinda I don't know, he said, "You can use the phone to make phone calls and your children are in the next room." And my husband's family lives in the Niagara region, 3 hours from me, and so I called my brother-in-law, my husband's brother. My husband has 3 siblings, and I called his brother and I said, "This is what's happening." And I didn't give him the whole story either. I said, "They're looking. I will call you back, but I need you to go to mom and dad and I need you to tell them what's going on." And then I hung up from him and they gave me full access to the landline, as I say, like the service was very sketchy in and out. And I went into my kids and I can never explain what it feels like as a mother. My kids were teenagers, the youngest 15. What it feels like as a mother to watch your children just broken, broken. And there were these women there, and they were older, maybe in their 60s. Um, and my kids, my 2 children and my 2 international students all had quilts around them. And these older women were hugging my children, and 2 beautiful female police officers were hugging my children. And I found out later those women were from victim services. And I don't know how, I don't know where they were even from, but somehow they got to my children when I couldn't. And they had my children wrapped in handmade quilts made by volunteers from victim services. And in that moment, you understand as a woman how important the community of women around you is going to become. I'm so sorry, Rosie. I didn't think I would cry this much.
Good.
And
I'm crying. So, like, you have to join me anyway. Otherwise, it's just me blubbering on a microphone. I think anything, when you go back into this and doing this, we've had therapy and we understand it, but somehow telling your story from start to finish and knowing that there's an audience listening to it, it's emotional and it makes us cry. And that's okay. You know, it's okay because you're telling the most awful thing that's ever happened to you. And you know what? If you don't feel emotion, then maybe that's worse because you're in a place now where you're able to show your emotion in sort of a little at a healthy cry rather than a less healthy coping mechanism. So, and I mean, this is I'm sort of speaking to myself as much as I'm speaking to you
no,
in a
and
reassurance.
I do believe that's true. I do believe that's true. Um, so I went to my kids and these incredible other human beings were there and my mother was there and my mom started the process of making the awful phone calls for
Mm,
me and calling, and just saying, who do I call? Who do I call? The police officer who lived across the road from us and his wife showed up because they knew.
yeah.
Bless them. And then my dear friend, one of my dearest friends, who did own a boat as well. I had called to see if her husband was around to come search, and she's just sent him. She wasn't in town, and she sent him and their son to get there to us to do whatever they could do. And so I had kind of an odd cast of characters around me. Like, it wasn't my it wasn't my sister, and it wasn't my best friend, and it was but it was people who needed to be there in that moment that were close to us, but maybe just that half a step removed enough to think logically. My ex-husband showed up. I allowed him to then go into parent mode with the kids. I had to call our international student program because remember, two of these
Of
humans were international
course.
students. So I had to call them to let them know, they're safe. They're safe. Um, and then I had to call my husband's parents' house, and everyone had gathered. Um, my his siblings, um, my in-laws, some of my nieces and nephews, and I had to tell them, "This is a recovery, not a rescue." And the level of guilt I felt in that moment, Rosie, because if not for me, he wouldn't live here. If not for me, he wouldn't have been on this lake. If not for me, he wouldn't have taken this trip. And here's a family that I've just destroyed. And
Um,
it's, I know that no one else on the planet thinks that, but I think it, and I still carry it. And they love me anyway. And um, they were such a support from where they were, but I knew how far away they must be feeling because an hour and a half, I was feeling that. We called our son's employer to get our son, who was about an hour away, to get him to the lake. My ex-husband went to get our oldest daughter, who was working at a camp about 45 minutes away, to get her there. Um, and my late husband's oldest daughter, my in-laws were contacting her. She lived in the Niagara region. And then my daughter, who was an international student, but very much my daughter, was in Toronto. My mom was calling her, calling my sister, calling my best friend, who had taken a nap and turned her ringer off, and calling my best friend, and, you know, doing all of those things. And so then you kind of go into robot mode of, okay, so we're searching and we need to do that. And well, I can't leave here because he's here. I can't leave until they come back with him. And then they had to sit me down again and say, um, our dive team can't be here for a day or two. And there's nothing else we can do today. We need you to take the kids and you need to, go home when you're ready. You need to take them home. And I remember looking at my mom and thinking, that's not happening.
mm,
And I think it was my mom, but one of the rational people around me said, you have to take care of the kids right now. That is what he would want. You have to take care of the kids. And so I understood that I had to go home, which is probably one of the toughest things I've ever had to do. And the OPP officer said before we left, I need you to understand where in the lake we lost him. And he pointed on the map to where. And I said, I know what that means. That's 400 to 500 feet deep.
wow.
And he said, our dive equipment only goes to 300. Okay. So we came home and um, it was crazy and it was chaos. And my sister had thrown things in a car and with her family and drove. And my best friend had jumped in a car and driven to me. And I had called from the lake. I had called a dear friend who was my kid's high school guidance counselor. And I see, we're going to need a counselor at the house when we get there. Can you come? And she was also a close friend and a close friend of Rich's. So I knew what I was asking of her, but she did. And I just was one of the fortunate ones to have this group of humans who just rallied in that moment to absorb my children and the chaos and the grief and the trauma. And, it was just incredible. From a good friend who's a nurse reaching out to my doctor for medication. It was a weekend to doing all of the practical things that had to happen. Um, and so we went about the process of this search, and I don't even like to come to this part of the story for your sake, Rosie,
Oh, you're
because
so kind. I know, and we did talk a little bit about this before. You know, the guilt and the searching, and obviously there's divers involved in your search, but it'll be what it'll be. I want to hear your story, so do please share it with us.
we knew I believe it was on the Monday that the search team was able to get there. There's still so many, I know you understand this, and for those listening who've experienced this, you have short-term memory loss from a lot of moments in time in those first weeks and months, and I can tell you now 6 years out, it doesn't come back.
No.
You you understand the history through other people telling you things that happened because
Hmm.
I have entire blocks that are missing. So
Same.
a lot of what I tell is pieced together by other people. But the divers came to the lake and they have to use pinpointing of eyewitnesses and, um, the kids' accounts. And so you have to take the children back to this
Mm.
place because I had 2 kids in the water and I had 2 kids on shore, and they have to give their account of where they think the boat was and then where the ping from the 911 tower was and all of the things, and I had to re-traumatize my children by taking
Mm.
them back. Um, First day, second day, third day of searching, my second youngest and one of my international students was graduating from high school. Okay, how do we do this? That international student's mom had flown over. How do we graduate a child from high school while there's divers on a lake? And I can't breathe and I can't function. And we have to do this because it matters and it's important. And by then, my in laws had come, my family, we had family there, we had extended people. And as is with graduations, they have limited tickets and they just gave us carte blanche at the school and said, you know, as many people as you need. They brought
But
us
don't you
into
think
the,
it's those little acts of kindness? It's things
oh,
like that, isn't it? And somebody gave me a year's soft play entry, and it sounds like such a relatively small gesture, but it was such a kindness to me. Not me
so,
personally, for the children, I hasten to add.
and just to interrupt the story for a moment, for those who are listening who may not be widowed, but you're looking to support someone who's widowed, just show up, just show up, just come. Because if you say to us, what can I do? The question is too big to provide an answer. I don't know what the answer is. But when you show up, man, that's just everything. It's
And we
just
remember.
everything. Oh, we remember. I block out. There's a lot that's blocked out, but I remember the
Mm,
ones who show up.
yeah.
Um, and we made it through a graduation with the kindness of my daughter was best all around student and valedictorian. I mean,
Oh, well, congratulations to you, rather belatedly, 6 years on. But the I sorry, I've just interjected because that must have been so conflicting because you're being told that your daughter has achieved such enormous success, but the
well,
diver's looking for your husband in the lake.
and strangely and funnily enough, it was at an event at the school a year later that my daughter, same daughter, and I attended. That someone said something about her having been best all around student the year before, and we both said, "What?" We didn't realize it in the graduation because we were
Yeah.
so not in our minds. So bless her heart, I didn't congratulate her on that until a year later
I
because I
think she
didn't even
probably
know.
understood.
Well, she didn't know either.
Yeah,
So
well, there you go, there you go.
it was one of those crazy things in retrospect that you're able to have a giggle about. And so for the next week, the divers searched, and every day my son would take them coffee so that they would remember that we were a family and that he was a person. And that crew of men were so kind to our family. And then eventually came the call saying, we we have to call off this search because we can't our equipment, it's not enough. And we're so sorry. And I remember later them telling me of all of their searches, he was the one they didn't find. And um My husband's boss, who was like a big brother to my husband, who I adore, very family environment, um, called me and he said, "We're bringing in a search team and they have equipment to go that low." And I said, "I can't afford it." He said, "You don't have to."
Oh, wow.
And like I said, you just show up. And so it took a while. The team had to come from quite a distance, um, possibly the US, I think the US. And so they came and we had to go through it all again. We had to go out in their boat. And I knew this lake like the back of my hand, but I wasn't there, so I didn't know. And from where kids from different vantage points thought he was, and witnesses thought he was, and the 911 ping thought he was, it's a needle in a haystack, and it's 400 feet down. The haystack is 400 feet deep. And so they did a lot of prep work before they began their search. And we had to go back out on the lake. And the strangest thing happened. My daughter at that moment said, "There's video." And I said, "What do you mean there's video?" She said, "I was videoing the tubing from the boat. It's on Rich's phone, and I cut it when we cut the engine." The other child had fallen off the tube into
Yeah.
the water. When we cut the engine before Rich jumps in the water. I said, I looked at the divers and I said, "We need that video because if I see that video, I know this lake and I'm going to be able to tell you
Mhm.
exactly." They had calculated the wind speed, the wind direction, the waves. They had calculated everything to determine the weight, the size of the boat, the drift of the boat. It wasn't a large boat, it was a small boat. And so my son started driving toward town. I had my neighbor grab Rich's phone. So I had to watch the video of the last 2 minutes of his life, which wasn't traumatic. It's actually, in retrospect, a little bit healing in that I got to see him and he was smiling and happy
Yes.
until he wasn't. And so we were able to freeze frame the video and we could look at landmarks. So we put it onto the computer and we took it onto the boat and I sat facing the way my daughter would have been facing. My mom came in the boat with me. My mom hates boats and water. So it was a lot of courage on her part to do that. And I sat and we freeze framed it and I'm like, "Okay, that's there. That's there. We need to go a little further, a little further, a little further, a little further." And so they create pings on their search map. So they ping, ping. And then something came over me and I said to them, "Just give me a minute." And I closed my eyes and just said, "Can we just go a little bit further this way?" And I remember saying to myself, "Come on, baby, just tell me where you are. Just tell me." I don't know if it's coincidence. I don't think it is. But something in my heart just said, "Put a ping here and mark it Lori. Put a ping right here." And so they did, um, probably to appease the crazy widow lady, but they did. And then they have to wait for the right conditions. As you know, when you're dealing with water, you have to wait for conditions. They had to wait for the right conditions. And I knew if we didn't find him, if they didn't recover him, it's deep, right? If they don't
Mhm.
recover him, we're never recovering him. And I had started to try to make peace with that. In the meantime, we had to hold a funeral. So we did that. Um,
So you also had a funeral without a body?
we did with a photograph.
Same.
Uh,
Massive, great big
Yeah,
framed photograph that I had no idea what to do with afterwards. It lived in the garage for a long time.
I can't tell you where that photo is. I don't know. Actually, you say that, I don't know.
I'm
But
going to apologise to my late husband. It did go in the skip when I moved out.
I mean, it's not something you want to look at. It's not.
It's just, it was this massive sort of A1 picture of my dead husband. And much as I love him, I don't necessarily want a picture that
That's
size
it.
of anybody on my wall.
No. And ours was a photo from our wedding. Uh, you know, only a year and a half earlier.
Right.
Um and so we had the memorial. I don't remember a lot of it. The kids spoke, I spoke. Um
That's interesting as well because I spoke and my eldest son spoke. He was 7 at the time, and it felt enormous at the time, and I look back and think this little boy stood up and read a letter that he'd written to his dad. But I'm also so very glad that we did, because we didn't have the closure of having the body, or the even just the confirmation that he had died. So for us, that was very important that we were there. All of us were
I
there. So
I
even the
think
baby was there.
I think that definitely is a piece of it, that when you don't have the other closure, that you need that
Mm,
closure, that you need it. Um, and then it was back into searching. And so we went from June 24th, the day of the accident, to July 25th, 5 weeks. And I had, the kids, I had pushed the kids to try to work and return to work, because you just don't know. This is open ended. It could never be, and we have to try to start to. So I had gone into my office to do something that really didn't require me being there, but I needed to do something.
yeah.
And I knew that it was the first day they were going to be on the water, the new team. And I came home, and my husband's boss's truck was in our driveway. And I came home, and my mom opened her door, which her door is on the driveway side, and she said, "Come here." And I came in, and he was sitting there, and I looked at him because I knew that they would know day one if the equipment would work or not. And I looked at him, and he gave me a thumbs up and a big smile. And I said, "It's going to work?" And he said, "No, we got him." I said, What do you mean you got him?" He said, "We got him." And Rosie, I will tell you this, it was the biggest wave of relief, followed by immediately the most crushing grief yet.
Yeah.
Because, okay,
Now you know.
now I know. And so um, they had just located him. They have to send a dive team down then, et cetera. And two of my kids were home, my two youngest, and he said, "Let's go to the lake." We got in the truck and we went. So um we were able to be there when they brought him in. Of course, called my in-laws on the way, and we were able to be there as they brought him in. My husband's boss, bless his heart, was able to ID him. And um because, without going into detail, but because the lake was so cold, it's Canada after all in June, because the lake was so cold, um, we were able to have a moment with him later, a couple of days later at the funeral home, um, for which I will forever be grateful. Some of the kids couldn't, and some of the
Yeah.
kids wanted to, and I did. And it just right now in this moment, I have to tell you, I have, not just for you, but I have tremendous guilt for that moment, because I know that a lot of WIDs don't get that moment, and I don't take it for granted. Um, and I'm so grateful for the people who facilitated that moment for us, um, because I know how lucky I am that that happened, and I know there's a lot who don't get it. And here's
I
the
think
thing,
I think
folks,
lucky might be pushing it, Laurie. I think we can't. I think we will. We, I
right?
think.
What a strange word for me to choose.
I think what it does, it gives context of the world we live in, where your dead husband being dragged out of a lake counts you as lucky.
Right? We live in a very altered reality from the rest
Yeah.
of the world. But here's the other thing I know with my whole heart is, other wids who didn't get that don't begrudge me that.
No.
They're
No.
grateful for it. And that is one thing about this world of widowhood, is we never begrudge each other anything. We
No.
are just full of gratitude.
It's
Um,
one thing I've learned from being part of the tribe or the community, and particularly in this group that we're part of, we share things like the celebrations and the sadness, and everybody, we're scattered around the world, and we all like root for each other, and that is something that I'm have never taken for granted is
No.
feeling part of. It's not a club any of us wanted to join. It's not a club anybody wants to be part of. But if you're in there and you find your people, you will be supported like you've never been supported before, right?
And I think that's a really good segue into the next part of this story, which is
May I ask you
go
something
on. Sure,
first?
sure.
Um, what happened? Do you know what happened? Do you know why he drowned?
So that's a question, of course, on everyone's mind. And first and foremost in my mind was there a medical event that could be hereditary that my children need to know about? That was that was the most important thing to me is was there a medical event that was it a heart attack? Was it an aneurysm? Was
Yeah.
it so then begins the journey of a coroner and autopsy and um enough of us have been through that to know it's
Mm,
nightmarish to think of and um we just don't the answer at the end of the day is we just don't know. There wasn't he didn't hit his head. There wasn't an aneurysm. There wasn't a heart attack. There was not um anything that we can understand and for the privacy of my children, I don't disclose publicly the last few moments um because I have kids who live with PTSD
sure.
and um and there's pieces when it's something like this and you would know this as well, you end up on the news, you end up in public and you can't
Public
protect
property.
yes, and you can't protect your children from that and misinformation gets out there and um, lots of misinformation happened, lots of presumption happened. I have a unique last name, and for a couple of years after, I could even go into a shop where people would, at the checkout, the cashier would say, "And your last name, for records, or and I would say my last name, and I would get the head tilt, the oh,
Yeah.
because only my family in this area has our last name, and so I don't disclose the last few moments, and we have an idea or a theory as to what may have happened, and the coroner agrees that possibly it could be what happened, and it was nothing nefarious. It was nothing anyone else did. It was um, something that may have happened with him, with his body, that could not be detected on an autopsy. But at the end of the day, we think possibly he fainted.
Gosh.
Um, and so if you're someone who faints, you have if you're a fainter, you're a fainter, and you have what's called a vagal response, in which you know it's coming. I am also a fainter, and he was a fainter and
Mm,
had fainted on multiple occasions. So um, my only hope in that moment is that in that second when he knew he was fainting, um, that hopefully he wasn't afraid. Um, I think I know his last thoughts would have been that he was scaring the kids and me. Um, it's really hard to think of, and you too, that maybe they knew for a minute.
yeah.
And
I hope he didn't know. I hope
I
he
know,
didn't know.
and I hope that too. I hope it was, boom. It would have been much easier to have been told, I'll be honest, that he had a brain aneurysm that he couldn't
Same.
have survived.
Yeah.
I hope,
Yeah.
um, and it's what I wanted to hear, and I'll tell you when they told me that that was not the case, it was another explosion
Yeah.
in our world. It was another, like, "Oh, damn it. What can't we just get a break here?" That it wouldn't
Hmm.
have mattered if he was on land or in water.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely understand that. And I was exactly the same. And although Ben's body has not been recovered, um, the theory is that he was sick on the boat. He was sick before he went in. The water was choppy. And then at the inquest, they sort of said that the possibility, obviously we don't know, is that if you're sick, you're meant to be sick into your regulator, and then it will deal with it. But the human instinct, of course, if you're vomiting, is to remove something from your mouth,
Oh,
um, which would obviously cause you to then inhale seawater. It would have been quick. We don't know that that's what happened. We're working with theories too, because even if he was to be found now, I don't think. there's much they would be able to do. But it's I, like you, wanted to think that it was something physical, and I took even a slight comfort, which I've only just thought about now, actually. It's strange. Some things are coming back to me as I'm talking to you. And I kind of remember thinking, oh, but if it was an aneurysm or a heart attack, then thank God he wasn't driving, because he could have crashed and killed a family. He could have taken out more people, which would have devastated in this one. But, you don't know. And we're working with theories and possibles and probables, and they ruminate round and around your head at night. Why? Why him? Why did he get in the water? Why? And I don't know as that will ever stop. And you talk about the guilt that you feel because you encourage him to go. Well, I encouraged us to both learn to scuba dive on honeymoon. It's something we did as a couple because I wanted to find an activity that we could do together, um, and learn a new skill. So yeah, the huge amounts of guilt and sorrow and this feeling of, why didn't I know? My other half, my soulmate, died and nothing happened. Like, there was no flash of thunder, or I didn't feel anything. I didn't know. And you think that you would. It's everything that you expect about grief, and anything that I've never given it a moment's thought, if I'm honest with you. But the expectations of how you might behave and how you might feel, they don't make sense. There's no point me saying to you, don't feel guilty, darling. You encourage him to go and do something fun with the kids. It doesn't matter how many times you're told that, you still feel, but what if, why? Um, yeah, I'm so sorry that you went through this, because the parallels between your situation and mine are uncanny.
Uncanny.
Even to the point that the police didn't send divers down initially for Ben, um, but his dive buddies arranged a trip to go
Yeah.
out and search. But actually, when the police heard about this, they then sent divers. So, but the idea of this community coming together and people offering you support in ways that you never imagined you would need it, and whilst you're so grateful for it, you don't want it. You want the one thing nobody can give you.
And it's so true. It's hard to explain. I remember the day after I have a two-story house, coming down the stairs into the living room, and I heard male voices. And it was just my normal anticipation that his would be one of those voices, and it wasn't. It was my brother-in-law, and it was my son, and it was my ex-husband, and coming down the stairs, and I did a scan of the room,
Mhm.
like, "Where'd Rich go? Oh my god." And
Yeah.
my sister and my best friend say, it was like Groundhog Day for, like, 2 weeks, because I would say, "This doesn't work without him.
Mhm.
I can't do 6 kids. This doesn't." It was enough for 2 of us full time wrangling these children, like, this doesn't work without him. But in the same moment, I knew, and I said it to my kids very early, "Okay, this is this is what has happened. This will not define us for the rest of our lives." I remember saying to our children, "If we let this destroy us, if we let this make us bitter, if we let this take us down, what a terrible waste of his life. What a terrible waste."
Mhm.
He would want you to be successful. He would want you to be contributing members of society. He would want you to be happy. He would want me to be happy. And if there was one thing I knew in those early days, was that he had handed me the baton, and it was now my job
Yeah.
to get them through this. 2 of the kids were starting university 2 months later, and I knew that I had to make that happen. And I did it with the help of so many people around me who, help them shop and help me prep them. I had kids. We immediately were in therapy, which I highly recommend to anyone immediately. We sought all of the resources that we could find. And I will tell you that grief and trauma is not a time for pride. It is a
No.
time to it is a time to humble yourself and take anything that anyone is willing to give to you. It is not a time for pride. And, just to fast forward, um, they have all graduated from college and university. They are all working in careers they love. They are all wonderful, thriving human beings. One is married, 2 are engaged, one is, with who I presume will be her forever person. They are kind, giving, charitable, wonderful human beings that are such a testament to the human that he was. Um, and I'm so proud of them for him because it's terrifying as a parent when this happens to us because our kids are forever changed in a way we never thought would come, and we don't know what their future looks like. And I can tell you, it's just natural as a mother that you don't really care what your future looks like. You only care what theirs looks like because your future, when you're widowed, has just been smashed into a million pieces.
Well, you just assume that your life is now. I mean, I felt that my job was to raise the children and to do
Yes.
that in an honourable and decent way. And
Yes.
much like you, I very much adhere to this theory that it doesn't define us. I say this working in the world of grief now, but I don't feel defined by the fact that Ben died, and nor do my children. It is a catastrophic thing. It is the most awful thing that can happen to a child to lose a parent. It is. It's why Disney films use it as a shortcut for overcoming adversity. And you look at these children and you think their life's ruined. Their life is ruined. It's happened. The thing that you fear the most as a child, which is to lose your parent, has happened. And it's happened in a shocking and brutal way. And I can't even tell you why. And these children that look at you, looking up at you, like you've got the answers, and you haven't got the answers at all. And you are just as scared and helpless as they are. Sorry. But
That's
because
okay.
but because there's no one else there to take the reins, it's just you. And you find this core strength inside of you that you did not know you had. And I wasn't a survivor. I was quite, I want to say flaky. Um, and I didn't know that I could do it. And I have. I'm just going to wipe my nose. um, and and you do it. And I now look at my children who are, they're younger than yours are, but I have one at secondary school who is flying. I have two who are, doing their last year of school. And I have one who's flying in year one. And they are kind, compassionate, um, engaged and bright, sparky, beautiful children. They are not the shells that I expected them to be. They are not anxious or sad or frightened. And that's not saying that they won't be in the future or that, other issues or other things could cause this. But I think that they, I hate calling kids resilient. I hate it because I feel like it really undermines their suffering. But they are. And with love and therapy and compassion, I think that they probably will grow up to be better humans. And that's not that I wish it on anybody at all, but I think knowing adversity and overcoming it at such a young age does give them a strength.
And something I would say to anyone who's listening who may be fresher in this than you and I are, believe in your core that your children's lives are not destroyed. You have to believe it, even if you're lying to yourself for a while. Believe it, because what I will tell you, and of course we'd all wish it undone if we could, but what I would tell you is if you do the things, if you do the therapy, if you speak openly about it in your home, if it's not a taboo subject, if you make conscious efforts, and it is a decision every single day to find joy in the world, to find love in the world, if you just look around you, you will find the good in the world. And if you teach your children to find it, what you will end up with, and I can say this to you, Rosie, because my kids are older than yours, is these phenomenal beacons of light. And other people will see it and they will see your children as the most incredible humans because let's be clear, our children have gone through something many adults have never gone through.
Yeah.
And we always say when you meet a widow, if you're lucky enough to date a widow, if you're lucky enough to marry a widow, you are one lucky human being because we have a capacity for love and that funnels through to our children. They don't take things for granted. And yes, every single good occasion in their life, there will be some sadness. But if you don't push the sadness down and you embrace the sadness, because sadness is just love with nowhere to go. If you embrace that, then the kids will understand that it's part of what makes you human. It's part of the human experience. And I don't know what I did in a previous life to be um, gifted with such wonderful things as, having to go through divorce and then have to go through death and step families and, disease in our family and all of these other things. But all I think is, well, if I was meant in this life to develop and grow as a human, I'm definitely doing it because who I am now and who you are now and who most of these listeners are now is not the person we were before. And um not to be cheesy, but there's a line in the musical Wicked and it goes, I don't know if I have been changed for the better, but I know that I've been changed for good. And
Hmm.
you just have to take that change in all that it is. And I have a dear friend who used to always say to me, I'd say, I'm so broken. And he would say, you're not broken, you're just bent. And then
Oh,
I would picture myself when he would say that to me as a tree. I'm like, I'm not broken, I'm just bent. And I can reach for the sun again and I can keep doing this. And it has been 6 years of reaching for the sun while acknowledging those moments in time. And I'm not strong. I hate that word. Please don't say that word to fresh widows, anyone. Please do not use the word strong to fresh widows. I'll tell you, they are warriors and they are in a war and they will be in that war for a long time. And if, I feel at this point, my mission with respect to losing my husband is A, to honor him. Our grandchildren and our great grandchildren will know who their Opa was, that he was a hero, that he was the most incredible human, um, but also to help people understand what those who are grieving are going through.
mm,
Because I was
100%.
I was lucky enough to have that support system. And something I wonder if it happened to you 2 weeks, 3 weeks out after the accident. Um, a, an acquaintance, not even a close friend, an acquaintance reached out to me and said, hey, I have a friend who lost her husband about a year and a half ago, and I told her about you, and she would like to connect with you. So there's this crazy thing that happens in widow world
Yeah.
where when it happens to you, either another widow or someone connected to a widow will reach out to you
Yeah.
and connect you to someone. And you don't even know that there's this buddy system
That's
in
what it is. It's like a
place.
buddy system, isn't it? Yes.
And it's
I'm
unspoken.
going to interrupt quickly because
Yeah.
I wrote down in the front of my book, right? So not even in your notes, on the front of my book, the expression grief Sherpa, because you used it in your application
Yes.
form and I loved it so much. Grief Sherpa, that's what we are. We guide the others through. I think and it's a way of channeling your own trauma into doing. I think it's a Mother Teresa quote actually. And it said, we can't all do great things, but we can all do good little things well. Or don't quote me exactly on that,
Yeah.
but and I think it's so right. We can't stop people dying, and we can't reach out and wrap up every person who's grieving. But what we can do is just drip feed out little pieces of information that will help them, will help the people supporting them, and will kind of take away the stigmatizing and the shame and the isolation of being widowed, because particularly when you're widowed and you're younger, you really don't fit in the world. You know this, we know this. And
The
it's,
only people who understand you are 82.
mhm,
Right?
yeah,
Like that, and that's the
yeah,
feeling, right?
yeah.
No one around you remotely understands the experience that you are in. They can't
And share,
understand it.
and sharing is this human experience, isn't it? We share with each other, we relate, and we feel more alive, more understood.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know where I'd be without my widow support. I don't know, because yeah, I honestly don't know. You can't guess at what the future might have held, but I know for me personally, in those lonely nights, my American and Canadian friends were a lifeline to me. And then I built my support within the UK as well. Yeah, the widow network, it does it's I can picture like a web, like just this web
It's
spreading out
true.
and kind of
And the
now
bonus for you in those late nights is that we were probably all
you
still
were.
awake
But I
because
would
of the time.
sometimes write something when I was drunk, and you guys would be like, "Dude, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon."
It's funny. My grief Sherpa is named Becky, and Becky
Well,
lost her
Becky,
husband.
thank you.
Yes, Becky, we love you. And we are still friends to this day. And Becky lost her husband to cancer, but she was a year and a half ahead of me. And I will tell you that every day for probably 6 months, Becky kept me alive because I would
Wow.
say to her, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to do this. It hurts too much. And I wasn't suicidal. And I think other widows can understand this. You're
Yes.
not suicidal. So if a widow says this to you, please don't try to brush it away, or please don't try to make it better. Just sit with them in it. Join them on the floor. When they hit that floor, join them on the floor and say, I can't imagine, or you must feel that. Of course you feel that. And she would say to me, I know,
Mm.
and it's okay. And it will eventually go away, but it won't go away right now. And it was really important to me to hear other people say, it's not going to change now, because I Googled how to speed up grief because
Of
I'm
course,
that
of
person,
course,
right?
of
I'm on a
course.
mission.
It
The
took
answer is you
me
can't.
It took me was it how it took me nearly 3, 4 years to get into therapy because I
Oh, wow.
locked that shit down. That was in a Pandora's box. If you open that and then with Jonathan being so sick as well, I really felt that if I opened that box, I'd never close it again. And right now I'm at the kind of, "Oh shit, I opened the box" phase. But
Yes,
everything that I work through and process and kind of put back neatly into the box, but the box doesn't get locked again. Am I mixing metaphors here a bit much? But the idea is I had a little moment this morning. I find I do a lot of thinking when I walk the dog. And for some unknown reason, I started thinking about this older lady that Ben used to check in on sometimes because we drove past the house and if it's snowy, he'd check in. And I just found myself remembering almost like a out of body experience. I'd taken the children to school and I'd driven past her house and I just pulled in and went and knocked at the door. She was an older widow and she just opened the door and just looked at me and she just went, I know, and cried. And I've not seen this woman since I moved out of the area. Um, but she knew and we just stood and cried. I don't even think we touched each other. It was one of those really odd moments and it kind of brought a tear to my eye this morning because I just felt for this broken girl standing on a doorstep, not knowing who to turn to. So she's turned up in a stranger's house because I didn't know what to do. And it talking to you has taken me back into it, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think you talking to you has kind of helped me stack my things up a little bit
process.
as well.
Yeah.
Mm. Now,
It's
Laurie,
interesting.
sorry, you go.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Um, It's interesting that you say that about going into therapy 3 to 4 years later, and I went into therapy the week he died.
Mm.
Whether it was a choice or whether, like, someone shoved me in the door, I'm not sure, but probably someone in my family shoved me through the door, and my kids as well. But, the therapist said something to me that has stuck with me, and I have conveyed it to other widows, to other people grieving, people going through divorce, and she said to me, "You have to feel it. You have to feel it all so that someday you can feel something else."
Wow.
And that was just a revelation to me. So what that did was it set me up for the next 6 years in that when I feel it, I let myself feel it.
Mhm. Yeah,
Because and do you have the experience that when you push it down, it just gets worse?
mm. Yeah, and I used to, as you'll be aware, I used to drink a lot. So for me, when that feeling started to happen, the grief, it was far easier for me to drink 2 bottles of wine and pass out than it was for me to acknowledge that this really hurt and that was okay, and to maybe until I've had therapy now, but maybe to sort of dig into why it was bothering me, what was going on. I think obviously this morning was because I was talking to you and I knew that it was going to stir up a lot of feelings. So my brain had sort of already started picking out little memories. Um, but yeah, you do have to feel it. And alcohol is very effective for numbing it, which by default means you don't feel it. So I
Mhm.
think and then once I got into therapy, that's when I stopped drinking. And so I'm kind of grieving freshly, which is very painful, but I have a lot more weaponry or defenses in my armory, so I'm able to deal with it. Whereas I think if I'd had allowed myself to go into this maybe a year in, I don't know that I would have. I think it would have broken me. So I do think you do things when you're ready. John went into counselling really quickly. He went in, and he's kind of further than me in the process because of that. But we work at our own pace, don't we? And people tend to find it when they need it. But I'm a big believer in therapy, and I know some people find it unaffordable or inaccessible, but there is a lot out there. And I used to spend as much at the bar on a Friday night as I do in probably a month's counselling, if I'm honest. Um, Now, Laurie, I do want to ask you, and first I want to congratulate you because you got
Mm,
married last month, didn't you? So you are
I
freshly
did.
married, and just the goosebumps are up. Enormous congratulations! I absolutely loved seeing that picture come up on Facebook, and I just want to just briefly ask you a little bit about your new relationship. I don't want to peek into your privacy too much, but obviously you have found love again, and I just in my notes, the way you talked about Rich is very much like I talked about Ben. You, they were your person, right? You loved them so much, and I never thought I would be able to love again. I genuinely thought I was done. He was my person, and when I fell in love again, it comes with a huge amount of conflicting feelings. The guilt. But I don't know. I even have that kind of. But what if he's not dead? Like, what happens then?
Yeah.
And even stuff when people talk about, I don't believe in an afterlife. I'm not religious, but people will say, "Oh, you'll see him again," or "He's watching you," and then I'm thinking, well, that's weird. Um, so just how did you navigate a new relationship and getting married?
I absolutely thought I was done.
Hmm.
I'd been through a divorce, and Rich was my second chance. So in our widows group online, we call it chapter 2, our chapter 2, often, and I'd had my chapter 2. My chapter 2 was who I lost.
Mm.
And so I thought, "Forget it. I'm
Yeah.
I'm done."
And
And
also, who's going to want to date somebody grieving with 4 kids, right? This is what
okay,
I.
so honestly, like, that's a whole thing, right? That's a whole thing, and maybe the people who do wanna date someone with 4 kids are maybe the people you would necessarily want to associate yourself to, and so I had a friend say to me, um, "I don't know, I feel like Rich is going to send you someone." And I said, "Well," jokingly, so after I was divorced, I said, "My next husband better be rich." And Rich would joke that you asked didn't weren't
You
specific
weren't
enough.
specific.
And so I jokingly said to my friend, "Well, if he does, he better be the biggest, most protective guy he can find." I kid you not, Rosie, 2 weeks later, I was standing in a local restaurant picking up a salad. I was at work, and, um, it was pouring rain. It was a summer day, hot summer day, and it was just teeming rain, and I said to myself out loud, "Wow, it's raining." And this big booming voice from behind me said, "It's crazy. I came off the highway because it was raining so hard." And I turned, and so for those of you who can't visually see me, I'm 5'9", and I'm not used
Oh,
to
you're the
voices
same height as
coming.
me.
Oh, there you go.
I'm tall
I'm
too.
not used I'm not used to voices coming from higher than me, and I turned around to see this large 6'4" man behind me, and we just had a brief conversation about weather, and he saw my work ID, and, I won't say where we work, but there's a connection. We don't work for the same entity, but, there was a connection there, and he said, "Oh, you work for I work for," and I was like, "That's nice, stranger. Leave me alone," right? You're kinda. And, by the end of this casual conversation while waiting in line for a salad and a lemonade, he said, "I'm going to give you my business card. Um, if you'd like to contact me, I would like that very much."
This
And
is so romantic.
I went out to my car, and you'll understand this, and I phoned my best friend, and I sobbed, and I
Oh,
sobbed, and I sobbed, and I said, "What do I do?" She said, "What do you wanna do?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "Then don't do anything." And I said, "Okay." And then he had written his personal cell on his business card, and it was about 5 days later I texted him, and I don't even know why. I
mhm.
wasn't looking. I wasn't looking. I don't know why I did. Maybe friendship, maybe, I don't know. And so he texted me back, and we just texted back and forth, just, I have 3 kids. Oh, I have 100 kids. Surprise, I have a whole bunch of children. And then we decided to have a phone call. And in that first phone call, he said to me, "Are you divorced?" And I said, "No, I'm widowed." Silence, which was
Mhm.
what I anticipated to happen. And the normal question when you say you're widowed is the person says, "Oh, were they ill? Or what happened? Or was it cancer? Or, oh, heart attack?" He said to me, "What was his name?"
Oh, wow.
And I went, "Oh." And so the conversation progressed. And I didn't tell him my story at that time because, I mean, now I'm telling the whole world my story. But at the time, if you were in my inner circle, you might hear my story. But if you weren't, you weren't going to. And that was mine. It was private and it belonged to my children and I. And so I didn't tell him right away. But he asked me about him. He asked me about my children. And then we just continued the conversation. And we had a few phone conversations. And then we met for a coffee, and that coffee was 4 hours long. And when he met me, he's a hugger. And so when he met me, he hugged me, and I felt myself exhale. And I can't explain it other than to say sometimes your spirit or your soul just knows when it's found a kindred spirit and it feels like home. And sometimes that's a friend, and sometimes it's a pet, sometimes it's your child. But I felt safe in that moment.
Mm.
And over the next 4 hours, we had a huge conversation in which we both cried. And I still didn't tell him my whole story, just a little bit of it. And he said, "I have to tell you, I went through your Facebook." And I thought, okay, stalker. But he said,
Like
I
you
went,
did it.
he said, I think his privacy settings were higher than
Ah,
mine. So I didn't.
rude. Mhm.
And he went through my Facebook and he said, "You had this beautiful life. And it's very intimidating." True. And so over the next little while, we just kind of got to know each other. I told my kids right away about him, right away. And then I invited him to come to a family dinner when I knew my kids were going to be there at my house. And we have this crazy card game we play sometimes after family dinner called Spoons. And it's very violent and laughing and ruckus and jokey. And he played it with the kids. And I watched them be okay with him.
Yeah.
And I tell you, a widow's heart is very cautious when it comes
Mhm.
to
Especially with
children.
children as well, because
Yes.
it's you're not looking for a partner just for yourself. You're looking for, and I don't necessarily mean a parental figure, because many of us don't want that.
Mhm.
Um, and you say yours were older; they didn't need a dad, but
No,
it was important to them, presumably, that they liked him and that they felt he was good for you, because it's kind of traumatic enough bringing somebody into lives. And actually, I from talking to widows with older children, often it's the older ones that are trickier because they've got much more of a voice on things. But yeah, you're bringing you, you know that what you're going to do could come with some pain for people, so they've got to be really, really worth it. They have to be. Otherwise, you can't subject. You can't let your children love somebody that is going to leave. We can't predict the future. We try.
it's it's funny. I remember saying to him, "Don't introduce me to your kids or your parents." He's an only child. "Don't introduce me to your kids or to your parents until you're sure we're serious, because I can't lose any more people in my life."
Yeah, yeah.
So it's very much a walls up approach, right? Because and I have to tell you, with respect to Jonathan, I was envious when you found Jonathan. Not that you found someone, but that you found someone who would understand your journey so
Mm.
deeply. And because I think for a lot of us, it's work for that person to understand. Like
Oh, absolutely.
my new husband is divorced, and so it's a different thing, right? He has an ex-wife who's still a mom, and wishes her well in life, and it's different. And so my kids come with trauma and PTSD and flashbacks, and a lot of things that make them who they are. And I don't make excuses for it, and I don't make apologies for it, because this is us. And so you are welcome to be part of this, but if you cannot accept that this is us, goodbye. And it's been nice. But very, very early, like before we met in person, for that coffee, that 4-hour coffee, he said to me, "I think I was meant to meet you because I need to tell you a story." And I haven't asked his
Mm.
permission, but I think he'll be okay with it.
If he's
Um,
not, we can edit it out. So say it, and then we can edit it
okay,
out if he's not.
okay.
I would always respect his boundaries as well.
I think he'll be okay. He said, I I think I was meant to meet you because I was meant to tell you a story." And I said, "Okay." And he told me a story about how he had AFib, atrial fibrillation. So
Thank you.
it's when your heart starts racing and it won't stop. And so sometimes it requires medical intervention in the form of medicine, and sometimes it actually requires being paddled. And so his was severe, and the saying goes, "The bigger you are, the harder you fall." So he's a huge
Hmm.
man, and the bigger you are, the more heart issues you can possibly have. And so he told me the story of having AFib, and one of the occurrences happened on Christmas Eve. The final one happened on a Christmas Eve, and when they paddled him, he flatlined, as you're supposed to do, and then they immediately paddle you again and you come back. And so his recollection is that they flatlined him and he was immediately coming in the back door of his grandparents' house. And he was seeing things on the wall that he hadn't seen since he was 5 years old. And he would tell you that in his childhood, that was his safe space. Like, of all the places in the whole world, that was the place he loved the most. And that he came in through the house, and his grandfather was a Mason, and he didn't know that as a child, and he didn't know it as an adult. Had it confirmed for him later, but he remembered as in this moment walking through the house and seeing the Mason symbol in a few places and thinking, "Oh, that's the Mason symbol." And his grandparents were sitting at the kitchen table. They had both passed. They were sitting at the kitchen table, and he was so excited. And he called out to them, and was excited to be there and talk to them. And he saw a few things in the kitchen that he remembered from childhood, hadn't thought about since then. And they said, "What are you doing? You have to go back." And he said, "No, I want to stay here with you." He said, "I had no fear. It was the most beautiful moment. I want to stay here with you." And they said, "No, you have to go back." And he was kind of in that moment of like arguing with his grandparents, and felt himself being pulled backwards out of the house. And then he
Wow.
woke up, and he was saying his grandparents' names as he woke up. And his parents happened to be at the hospital with him. He said his mom almost jumped on his chest, like, "What were you saying? What did you just say?" And
Mm.
so they explained to him that he had been flatlined longer than they wanted him to be, and, like, in essence, had died. And he said to me, "I think I was meant to tell you that. If nothing else, I was meant to tell you that he wasn't afraid."
Yeah. And that's what we
And
want, isn't it?
And that was such a gift to me. And you can call it what you want, whether it's the way the brain's neurons fire at the end, whether it's faith, whether it's an afterlife, whether it's heaven. You can call it whatever you want. But the knowledge that he went through something very traumatic and that he wasn't afraid
Mm.
just gave me such a sense of peace. And I do tell that story to other WIDs because I want them to know, whatever you call that, that hopefully all of our loved ones didn't go in fear or trauma or pain, because that's really the only wish we can give them at this
Yeah.
point. And so I think we did a little trauma bonding in
Yeah.
that moment. Um, and it's an interesting thing to date after death. You're terrified to tell the people around you because you're so afraid of being judged.
Judgment. Yeah. Judgment. Too soon, too long. You know, and everybody has an opinion, and some they'll say to your face, some I'm quite sure they won't. Um, but I struggle to see why anybody wouldn't be happy. And I mean, unless you've, brought an absolute disaster into your life, if it's a decent person who makes you happy and is kind to you, and you said that you wanted to feel safe. And I wrote next to this, we never feel safe. I haven't felt safe since that day. I live with a constant fear of feeling of like low grade dread, what's going to happen. And my way of controlling it is to just try and control everything else. And then when I feel out of control, that's when I kind of get all meltdowny, I suppose, for want of a better word. And I love the fact that this guy has come in and made you feel safe. And I think that is such an underrated thing to feel
And
safe.
and and the safe comes with time.
Mhm.
because you may not initially trust them, and you may not initially feel as though, um, like, what if they die? What if they
Oh
leave?
god, of
What if
course.
they and I mean, he rode motorcycle. Um,
I know
and
she
there were
used past tense for that.
he did. Yes, he rode.
He used to ride a
Currently
motorcycle.
currently does not. And crazily has a tremendous fear of water and
Oh.
can't really swim. And I have my whole life have been a water baby. Like I love the water. It's second nature
Do
to
you
me. So
still?
I do. And it did take a while.
Mm.
It took a while. Um, I didn't We have a pool. I live in
Yeah, we
Canada
do.
where we have so many lakes and beaches. I travel to the Caribbean. Um, it probably took a year before I could swim underwater.
Mhm.
And I don't think I've ever told anyone that. And another year to 2 years before I could be in a boat, but I will not be around a boat where there's water skiing and tubing, which is something my
No,
family did
I mean,
growing up.
I'm like that with divers. If
Yeah.
we've just been away and there was a dive school going away, and John just sort of said to me, "Oh, look, there are divers over there." And if I'm moored, I'm okay. But the first trip I went on after Benidorm, I was walking down some steps to a beach in Portugal, and these divers just walked up past me, still in their wetsuits, and that was. But it's the unexpected. It's the little flashes that pop in, and um, I was like you. I'm a water baby. I love to swim. I like to be in the sea, lakes, canals. Do you have canals over there?
Yes.
They're not clean. You wouldn't want to swim in them. And I remember vividly the first time I got in the sea, and it felt like I'd overcome this enormous obstacle. And I was in there with my children. It was like on Christmas Day actually, because I'd taken them away that first Christmas, and it was all right, But even now, wave machines at public pools, deep water, the children being in deep water. Yeah, I'm edgy, much edgier than I would have been. But my kids are all very competent swimmers. That was important. They had to be able to swim. But the thing is, we say this, but both of our husbands were competent swimmers. So
Absolutely.
there's nothing that we can do to prevent disaster happening apart from try and live now. And it's very difficult not to be dragged back into the past or try and predict the future. And I know that's what meditation and mindfulness is about, but particularly when you've lived through what we have, to try and remain in the moment and enjoy your life. I get very angry sometimes because I think, why won't my brain just let me enjoy it? I've been so
Mhm.
lucky to be offered this second chance of happiness and life. And so why am I face down crying? It's frustrating because you want to be better and you want to be healed. But there is, as you said, there is no slow process. You have to feel it. You have to walk through it. You got to go. Do you have the book Bear Hunt over there? We're going on a bear hunt. It's going to be a big one.
Yes, 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 yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and it's you can't go over it, you can't go under it, you've got to go through it, and I
That's right.
think that's it's so true.
What a great analogy. I've never put it in that context. But it's true, you have to go through it. There
Mhm.
is no escaping it, and one thing that you have to learn is that grief is going to be your companion for life.
Yes.
So at some point, you have to make friends with it, which sounds strange, but
Yeah.
at some point you have to understand, and I label grief as a she, that
Okay.
that she is there with you to walk with you, and that she sometimes um puts me back on an even keel when I'm worrying about a clean house, when I'm worrying about something
Mhm.
silly at work, when I'm worrying about she's there to remind me to live today, to
Do you
not
know what
take a
that's
second
uh,
for granted.
do you know what? I need to do that, actually, and you are a very wise woman, Dory, because I have written lots and lots of little quotes that you've written down. You probably saw me get the highlighter pen out at one point. Um, you have got some real wisdom there, and I'm really grateful to you for sharing it with us. And yeah, you do. Your grief lives with you. You have to make room for it. You have to make a space for it, and it will smack you in the face occasionally. But I totally agree. I
Mhm.
made a list of 6 pages of things I need to do, things that were bothering me. And it's such mundane stuff like, oh, need to start thinking about Christmas. And you're right, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Everybody that I love right now in this moment is safe. And actually, that is all that matters.
And it's interesting for me too. I don't know if you experience this as a trigger, but I do. Sometimes the mundane piling up and my stress level. I'm a professional artist and I have another full-time job and I have a whole bunch of children who are adults now. And my new husband has three adult children and we have two
Christmas
grandbabies.
sounds expensive in your house.
Oh, it's crazy and it's the best thing
I
ever.
was gonna
It's
say,
the
but I
best
also
thing
want to
ever.
be involved in it somehow. I sort of want to be part. This
It's
sounds like the
so
best thing.
wonderful.
Mm,
And this poor man who is an only child to come into this, it's chaos and it's the most beautiful chaos. But
yeah.
sometimes when I'm stressed or overwhelmed, I had a meltdown. My birthday was Saturday and I got overwhelmed. I'm painting for an upcoming show and I got overwhelmed and I had an epic meltdown about the house not being tidy. And it really came around to if I cry it out, usually when I start to have a meltdown about something else, it generally comes around to, oh, this is grief. And the grief is that I'm another year older that he didn't get.
Hmm.
And
Are
so
you older
eventually,
than him now?
when the accident happened, he had just turned 47. So he had been 47 for almost a month, and I was 46. And my birthday's in September, and I turned 47 in September. So I surpassed his
You did
age
that quite early on.
the 1st
Mhm.
October, the 1st October. So and every year I lost a friend to leukemia in my 20s. And for a very long time, every year I would think, this is a year I got that she didn't
Yeah.
get. And I would think about her. And now I think about him. And I cried to my husband, my new husband, on Saturday and said, like, it's very complex. And when you're 6 years out, it's kind of the feeling of, I am having the privilege of watching the children achieve all of their things, and I get to be happy. And when I got married just 2 weeks ago, when I got married, I was so happy that day. I wasn't
Yeah.
full of grief that day. I had some grief in the week leading up, but I was very happy that day. And I felt terrible this past weekend that I got to be so happy.
Yeah.
And maybe I don't deserve to be so happy again. And all of that kind of, you know, goes through. And it's interesting you and I are speaking around the time of the anniversary of 9/11 because,
Yeah.
a lot of those people have moved forward in life and when you see us from the outside, when you see you, when you see me, you are so happy in your marriage with Jonathan. I am so happy in my marriage with Fred. But hope people understand that that doesn't come without a lot of work, a lot of very hard feelings. Um, and what you see from the outside isn't always what it really looks like.
No, it's absolutely true. And the amount of times I've been told that I don't look like a widow, that oh, but you seem really happy, and because I'm not wearing my veil. I left it at home today. But do you know what, Laurie? You are. I do. I don't know whether you like being called an inspiration or not, but I think you are. I think you're amazing. I've genuinely loved talking to you so much today, and I have made look at and you can't see it because the camera's too low, but loads and loads of notes. And actually, I want to fly over to Canada and meet you. I'm going to do it. We're going to go to Canada one day. I'm going to come out there. But
Do it.
I do want to go to Canada. Actually, it's one of the places the kids would like to visit. But for now, I just want to say thank you on behalf of everybody myself, particularly personally and professionally, but also on behalf of everybody that will have listened to this by the time this goes out, because I think within your conversation, you have shared a really beautiful love story, two beautiful love stories, actually, two, and a tragedy of such kind of monumental scale that people won't ever have known anything like it. So to be able to hear what it's like, it's not a voyeurism. It's a curiosity that's human because we don't know what it feels like until it happens. So by sharing this awful thing that's happened, but interjecting it with flashes of beauty and gold, it's like a beacon, isn't it? Something's out there saying that there is, yes, these awful things may happen to you and we can't do anything to stop them, but there is still a beautiful world out there. And I know you use that almost that exact word. And I wrote it's in the what I wrote. I read at Ben's memorial. I said I promised to show the children there is a beautiful world out there, and I think that it's such an important message that you keep fucking going. You keep fucking going because there is a beautiful world out there.
And it's so filled with beautiful souls,
Mm,
incredible human beings. And, if there's one thing I would want to tell people, there's two things I would want to tell people who are going through it, because I'm very cognizant of the fact that you and I are years out, and there are
yes.
widows out there
Oh,
listening to
yes.
this podcast who are fresh. And I know when I was fresh, it was harder to hear some things. But if I can give them two promises, two promises, it would be, if you just look for the helpers in the world, if you just look for the kindred souls, you will find them. I can honestly tell you, without our group, who my grief Sherpa Becky directed me to, without our group of these wonderful collection of incredibly diverse people from all over the world.
We're a real ragtaggle bunch, aren't we?
We really are. It's so amazing. I just, I'd invite you all in, but I'm sorry, we're a closed group. You can't come, but we can help you find other people like that. But find those people who, for you, make you feel seen and understood, and they normalize your experience.
Yeah.
You feel so abnormal in this world as a younger widow, that to find the people who help you to normalize that experience is absolutely critical, and don't let them go. Like, just don't let those people go. And the other thing I would say to people is, as you progress in your grief, and I would also say this to the people listening who may not be widowed, please let go of the idea of one soulmate. Please let go of the concept. Western society has really, for lack of a better term, bastardized the idea of soulmates in the entertainment industry, because it's, I
Yeah.
haven't found my soulmate yet. Will I ever find my soulmate? I've found my soulmate. Oh, my soulmate doesn't love me. I'll forever, pine for them. Or my soulmate died. And I'll never get another soulmate. Let that go, because what we do in that is we box ourselves in, but we also tend to judge and box others.
Mhm.
And when I said to you about being afraid to tell people when you're dating someone, there's a tremendous fear in our society that if you see someone loving again, those people maybe forgot the person they lost. And I
Mm.
think that a lot of the negative reactions that come from that are because it scares people,
They
because
don't want to be
I'm
forgotten.
they don't want to be forgotten.
Yeah.
And if you can
It's their own fear. Mm.
let go of that fear of being forgotten, because what I will tell you, and I use this analogy a lot, and it's super probably not an appropriate analogy, but I use this analogy a lot when I'm explaining in finding my husband and our relationship. You know, if you have a dog and you love that dog, and that's your soul dog, and I have had soul dogs in my life, and you love that dog, and that dog's your whole world, and that dog dies, when you eventually find another dog, that dog will be different than your previous dog. Probably won't look the same. They'll have a completely different personality. And how you love them and how you feel about them will look differently and be different, but you won't love them any more or less, and you don't forget your first dog. It's like, God forbid, for those who've lost a child. If someone were to lose a child and then decide to have another child, you wouldn't judge them.
Yeah.
You wouldn't
Well,
judge them and say, oh, you're gonna forget your first child. You're not going to forget your first child. Only a lobotomy would help you to forget, you wouldn't
and
forget.
actually, I
So,
sometimes say it's like having children. You don't have one child, then have another, and someone goes, "Well, how are you going to love another one? You've already got one."
right. So if we can
Mm.
let go of the stereotype of that, because part of grief is falling out of romantic love with the person who has
Mm.
died, because you can't be in romantic love with someone who isn't there. You can't.
No,
And
no, that's
letting
true.
go of
Actually,
it,
I've not thought. Mm.
it's so hard to let go of, right? Because you feel like you're letting go of them. But that romantic love turns into family love. And I love Rich with my whole heart, and I don't love him even a speck less than I did June 24th, 2017. Not even a speck less. But now he is my family. And I can't be in romantic love with him because he can't reciprocate that. So you have to fall out of that romantic love, but just because it shape shifts doesn't mean it lessens. It will
Mm.
never lessen. And Fred, my husband, and I have had conversations about our kids, and and we talk to our granddaughter, who is 5, who is Fred's granddaughter. I we She already knows who Rich is. Fred's biological grandchildren will grow up knowing about an Opa who would have loved them and would have, and I talk to Fred's family about Rich, and they are welcoming and accepting, and Rich's parents adore Fred, and he is their family. He now calls them mom and dad. If you open your heart, there's room in your heart to love more people always. And I think maybe having new kids come into my life who weren't biologically mine maybe prepared me for that. But
Yeah.
it you know, I would hope that my story would just inspire people to understand that you can have love again, whatever form it takes, and that it's okay, and you're not doing a disservice to the person you lost. In fact, you're probably honoring them
Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
sense. And just be gracious to those around you who've lost in whatever form they find love, and um and just shower people with kindness and understanding, and you will find a far more beautiful world than you knew
Yeah.
existed. Shed away those stereotypes and those preconceived notions, and there is, like you said, I want to show my children there is beauty in this world. There's
Yeah.
so much beauty in the world.
And there's beauty in our stories. There's beauty in every single story because every single story that we talk about came from love. You know, it might not have ended in love. We've had people on who have fallen out of love, but it started with love. And I think on that note, Laurie, because you and I have racked up nearly 2 hours. And I could go for longer, if I wasn't sitting, because you say that Rich built you your art studio. John has created me my recording studio, so that's where I am at the moment. And it's wonderful when somebody is so invested in you that they want to create something for you to work in. But it's very warm in the UK at the moment, and I can just feel sweat trickling down my back, which is nice. But Laurie, you are an incredible woman, and I wish you and Fred so much happiness and your wonderful blended patchwork babies that aren't babies anymore and the grandbabies. Your house sounds like a really lovely place to be. And my yoga teacher popped into my house the other day, and she said to me, "Your house just feels so happy." And I thought, wow, like, to have a house that is happy, right? After everything we've been through. And I think that is testament to you. And I think we should take some credit because I'm very self-deprecating, critical, but we did this, we walked this path, and I'm proud of you. And I hope that you're proud of yourself. And I think that anybody who knows you and listens to this will just love you more. So
That is so sweet.
thank you for sharing. And I hope everybody listens. And if you have any questions about Laurie's episode, because this will go out on the Monday, Laurie, and then I'll talk about it on the Friday, as you know. So if you have any questions for myself or Laurie and you want to ask them, please do feel free. I'll pass them on. But for now, everybody, you just take care of yourselves. And once again, thank you, Laurie.
Thank you, Rosie.